Hello everyone, I am Richa, and along with Mansi, I welcome all of you into this third episode of Walking with Philosophers, Talking with Philosophers, where we try to have a candid dialogue with young philosophers, with budding philosophers, with old philosophers, if ever this term would apply, to understand certain philosophical issue, to understand the role of philosophy in the current time. So, keeping that in mind, today we have Sania Ismaliee with us. She is a doctoral candidate at the Humanities and Social Science Department at IIT Delhi. She's also a Commonwealth Split-Site Fellow at the University of Oxford. Sania, we are really happy to have you on board. And considering you are someone who is young, who's about to submit her PhD, I believe many people who are listening to us, who would be watching this series, this particular interview, they would get a lot of inspiration, a lot of hope. I'm sure a lot of questions would also be perhaps answered in the kind of dialogue which we'll try to have. So thank you so much for taking out time and doing this interview with us.
Thank you so much, Richa, for having me on board, and Mansi, you too.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that introduction, Richa. And I know we've come across each other's contacts through IPN previously first, and it seemed like a very good platform to have you, who's on her journey of a kind of a student of philosophy currently, and then soon enough you will end with your student phase and probably go on to the stage of being a practicing philosopher. So just I would like to know from your experience, like we've covered previous two interviews with professors of philosophy particularly. So as a student of philosophy, what do you think is that unique that led you to this discipline A? And then how do you think you're going to transition off from your journey currently onto being a student to being a practicing philosopher? What do you think that transition is going to look like for you?
Okay, thank you for those questions. Okay, responding to the first part, that what led me to this path. Well, this actually reminds me of something which one of my bachelor's professors had once shared, that philosophy chooses you, you do not choose philosophy. I think that is like something very appropriate with what happened with me. I had never ever thought that I'd ever be choosing philosophy as a field. In fact, a lot of people confuse, philosophy and psychology. I think I was also maybe perhaps one of those. And I had thought that, okay, I'm going to study something about mind, something about, humans, something about understanding them, something about questioning and questioning like everything. That was something which really excited me. And then when I was pursuing my bachelor's, but I remember during my second year when our professor was teaching us Socrates, and he told us that Socrates had said an unexamined life is not worth living. That really hit hard. That really did hit hard. And I was very, very excited and very much passionate about philosophy back then. I think that is exactly when I realized that this is something I want to do. This is something I want to study, and I would want to pursue it further. And I think that is how it all started. And sorry, the second part of your question was, transitioning as a student to, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so, well, honestly, I haven't actually thought about it well, but I am excited. I'm pretty excited to think that that how I will transition from that student to being maybe say an applied philosopher, or someone who's engaging with philosophy on a daily basis. But I think that's something which I have always tried to do since as I was a student, because that was something which, especially during my master's, my teachers and some of my seniors had taught us, that you should try to relate whatever you're studying with whatever is happening around. So I think that transition had kind of already begun from there. But yeah, I mean, I think when you teach philosophy, it's of course going to be very different than right now when you're a student and when you're thinking about things on your own. But when you're a teacher and when you'll be sharing things with your students and trying to make them understand through certain perspectives, I think that will be a very different experience, of course.
So,
Yeah.
Sania, because you
Go ahead.
mentioned about Socrates, I'm wondering that in the present time, because you also made a very interesting point when you said that people usually confuse psychology with philosophy. That okay,
Yeah.
you're doing philosophy, that means you do studying something about mind. You're trying to observe people.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
taking it ahead from there, Sania, I'm curious to understand that as someone who is doing PhD as well as who's in the transition of becoming a philosopher, what is philosophy for you? And also, how do you understand the relevance of philosophy in the contemporary time? Because we are also talking about applied philosophy, public philosophy. How do you see philosophy in the contemporary times? Has your definition changed from what you used to think about philosophy then now, someone who's working, who's reading,
Yeah.
who's exploring?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. Yes, yeah, as I had already mentioned, that Socrates is an unexamined life is not worth living hit me very hard. So I think that is what philosophy is all about. It's about, critically questioning each and everything, including the norms which the society throws at you, or things which are taken for granted, and then trying to just maybe just think through those, that whether they make sense or not, what are the hidden assumptions behind them, whether they make sense or not, if there are any problems, what are the problems, and what are the alternatives that one could think about. So I think thinking critically, and by thinking critically I mean engaged thinking, is something which I consider is at the heart of philosophy.
Yeah, I think even I would agree with that. I mean, even in my own experience, I've come across this, like when people would question me, what is it that I do or studied previously? And then after a while, I would meet those people again. It would almost always be, oh, you did psychology or you did sociology. It's almost always taken like people just, I don't know, maybe it's something to do with the prioritizing of STEM education. I don't know, probably at least in the Indian context. People very clearly have an idea or a definition about what is it that the science subjects or the study of science is going to
Hmm.
entail, and what is it that you're going to become after pursuing that. What is it that the study of mathematics or languages or history or art going to do. But philosophy as a discipline for them to for people to kind of understand that we as researchers or scholars who've gone into the field of philosophy, that we've gone ahead and pursued this academically even, it's hard for them to differentiate, okay, then what is different with philosophy. And as you mentioned, it's a discipline of thinking. And not to say that all those other disciplines don't involve thinking, but I think with philosophy, that's the main tool of rigor, right? Like the whole task, it's not just about reading Socrates or Plato or any other XYZ scholars. It's the whole job of us analyzing their reading, and how is it that we participate with what others have written or spoken previously. So I mean, I'm going to take that as a like, even I understand that, like, like you mentioned that quote by Socrates, that an unexamined life isn't worth living. So in that sense, the discipline of philosophy is like an examination of your own life, and the tools that we learn in the process of studying philosophy academically, whether it's critical thinking, argumentation, analysis, those are some tools which just help you to do that. I think there's something you mentioned about your experience while you were in masters, right? And you were saying that how your seniors or professors would suggest, it's not necessarily the case of you reading other philosophers, but you need to kind of apply and relate that to what's happening around you as well. Um, so I just want to kind of understand from your perspective, what do you think is the role of experience in terms of the development of a philosophical thought? Um, because especially I would say that with a little bit of worry and concern in the Indian context, how I have seen more or less philosophy being practiced in educational institutes, they try to keep experience at bay, and
Yeah.
there's only scholarly philosophical discussion or readings. So experience is something which is not really brought in into the early stages of philosophical teaching, I feel.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for pointing that out, Mansi. That's actually very, very true. Each and everything that you said, specifically about, people not understanding what philosophy is, and them asking you that, oh, it's psychology or something of that sort. Well, I mean, that's really so relatable. But I mean, you're right. The way philosophy is taught at higher educational institutions in our country, it's very much not just text driven, but yeah, very Eurocentric. And even if we are learning Indian philosophy, it's taught in a very different way. Like it's not something which it's taught in a way which most of us feel that okay, we just have to learn it and get over with it, but we are not really interested in thinking through it. So coming to your question about the role of experience in philosophy, I think it's very, very important. Especially as a political philosophy student, what I have realized is that whenever you are trying to philosophize or theorize something or engage with something, it's always your surroundings, it's always what you experience. So I mean, for example, if someone speaks about, say, feminism, they'll talk about feminism because of what they have experienced or what they have observed people are experiencing. So just a small example, I remember very well, and I must actually explicitly mention over here that Richa has a very, very crucial role to play over here, along with Professor Satya P Gautam, in evoking that, in awakening the feminist inside all of us. So there were so many things which we take for granted, which we dogmatically hold on to, really crib on to, and which we don't want to like let go. But there were certain things from our experiences which we realized after taking classes with Gautam sir, and of course having conversations with Richa, that we realized were problematic. So for example, I remember once I was traveling in a bus, and there was a girl traveling in an auto which was like running very close to the bus, and a woman inside that auto was smoking. And I mean, the reactions of men inside the bus was like, oh my god, look at her, she's a dawn, or something of that sort. But that wouldn't have been the reaction had it been a man smoking. So that was something from experience. That's something when I realized how gender stereotypes are function, and how certain stereotype, how certain roles are expected from you. So that's like experience, that's like something from experience that I understood. So something which was being taught to me in the classroom was something I received specifically because of what I observed was happening around me in my experience, and of course my other friends' experiences. So it's, of course, it's like it plays a very, very crucial role.
So, Sania, taking ahead from what you said, because it's a very interesting point, that largely in institutes, in colleges and universities, we have been doing philosophy of philosophers. And largely these
Yeah.
philosophers are male philosophers, a set of 12 people around whom we have been swinging the wheel. That, okay,
Yes.
Kant, Plato, Socrates, not that they aren't important, they are very important. But we, whenever we talk about someone who has been teaching philosophy to us, this is something which myself and Mansi, we discuss this a lot, that why all the time the people who have been teaching us philosophy, why, especially if they are women, why they have only been perceived as mediators who are telling us this is what Wittgenstein has said, this is what Socrates has said, this is what Aristotle has said, full stop. I'm just acting as a dignified mediator in telling you these are the readings, this is what the analytical idea is all about, which is problematic. But taking a cue from here, do you think that this age old dogma which exists within the society about philosophers, that these are armchair intellectuals. They talk about society, but they are never going to talk to society. Like we are that wall. I don't know whether we are as a bridge. We are right now as a wall, and maybe by these kind of series, we are just trying to tell people that there's no intellectual snobbishness in this community. Yes, there has been, maybe because it's related a certain part of philosophy, or who could philosophize, is related to aristocracy, is related to class as well, but now it does not exist anymore, and we are by philosophizing the mundane, like the example which you gave about a woman smoking and the gaze. So it's a philosophical issue. But then again, I remember when I started doing feminist philosophy, there were a lot of ifs and buts in that particular time, saying, are you sure this is hardcore philosophy? How is it philosophical, by the way? If you're that interested, then go to literature department, go to psychology. But the premise stands that, do you think that there is a gender gap in philosophy? Do you think that we should start introducing people not as teachers of philosophy, but as women philosophers, queer philosophers? Because largely when we talk about philosophers, unfortunately, the first idea which comes to our mind is a man philosophizing, a man thinking, because they are thinking beings.
Yeah, unless we have like a clear idea of what a philosopher looks like it needs to be a man with a beard, like we were discussing previously.
And we want you also not to only talk about, but also tell us what is for you to look like a philosopher, if ever, because now look is something, Sania, which has become so important that sometimes as young faculty members, as young scholars, we are actually walking on that thin line where sometimes you have to look in a certain way just to get that certain kind of acceptance. That, okay, if I am sharing a panel with 4 philosophers, and needless to say, those 3 philosophers are male, and if I'm the 4th one, I have to look in a certain manner to be eligible enough to be qualified as a philosopher. So what are your views on gender gap, and what are your views on the idea of look of a philosopher?
Okay, thanks. That's very interesting, actually. Regarding gender gap, I think we could talk about the gender gap at 2 levels. Okay, one is maybe in terms of the number of women, philosophy professors we have, and the other is how many women philosophers are actually taught. So I think in terms of the latter, there is definitely a huge gender gap in philosophy, and I strongly feel that, because if you just pick up any curriculum across the country, you would rarely find any woman philosopher's name in that, except maybe, you might sometimes have Hannah Arendt's name, or sometimes maybe Martha Nussbaum. That's it. You would not really have any women philosophers' name otherwise, especially even if we are studying like Indian philosophy, we talk about Maitri and Gargi, they were there. But are they really taught to us the way Adi Shankara is taught to us? No, of course, no. We just told, yeah, there was one Maitri and Gargi, so they were like women philosophers. We've had a rich tradition, but we haven't really engaged with that tradition. So I think in terms of this, there is certainly a gender gap in philosophy, because women philosophers are just marginalized. They are like not even included in the curriculum. There's one thing to be included and kept at the margins. There's another thing to be not be included at all. So I think it's like they're not included at all, even if we acknowledge that they do exist. That is one thing. Second thing, this look of a philosopher. Again, it's very, very interesting. I mean, I think traditionally, if you ever just, type on Google philosophy or philosopher, you have that image. I think that's Socrates, right? Sitting like this. So that's like the popular
the thinking man.
It's the thinking man, the bearded man. So, I mean, I actually do not know what is it to look like a philosopher. I think philosophers are not unusual people, right? I mean, they are normal people. So why can't they look like normal people? So that's very, I mean, I wish I could experience that as well. If people tell you don't look like a philosopher or something of that sort, that'll be a very, I'll be very amazed by that kind of a question, that what would it be to look like a philosopher? Because, but yeah, I do understand when you're saying that the image is that it has to be a man, like, a bearded man, or maybe just a man. But because there are a lot of people who think that, oh, a woman, she might be teaching philosophy, but she is actually not a philosopher, or she is not, good at
Yeah.
doing what
They
the
make
others are doing.
they make a distinction. Like people tend to make that clear distinction that a woman may be a teacher of philosophy, but not a philosopher
Yes.
herself.
Yes, you're right. You're right. That is something which I have come across once, but that's just a bizarre concept, actually. But that also shows how what kind of biases we have when we are, doing philosophy, teaching philosophy, or engaging with philosophy as a discipline.
Thanks for that, Sanya. And I'm going to take a cue on something you mentioned, and perhaps Richa also elaborated on that. That there is that misconception with people that philosophers or philosophy, even though it comments or writes on matters about the public or practical affairs, but it doesn't really engage directly with the practical affairs of the society. It doesn't offer hard and concrete solutions to the problems, even though it may discuss or theorize on those questions in the great detail, right? And I'm gonna give an example again of Hannah Arendt, right? In her interview itself, she mentions when the interviewer introduces her as a philosopher, and then she corrects him, saying that I would much rather be equated or associated with being a political thinker or an activist, more or less, but not really a philosopher. And I know you also have your interest in the field of political philosophy, more or less, right? Do you think if you are interested in politics or political theory or political philosophy specifically, does that really take away from being a pure philosopher in some sense? And if you do think, maybe from your perspective, what do you think about that? And why do you think Hannah Arendt would probably say something like that?
Okay, thanks. Well, I would not think that, one stops being a philosopher once you try to, maybe be a more engaged thinker, or try to be involved in politics or whatever the field is. But unfortunately, again, this is, a perception that people have, as Richa had, mentioned earlier. If you're working in a field which is not considered to be hardcore philosophy, people will ask you, is this sociology? I think that's political science, or that's not really philosophy. So that is, I think, a problem. That is a problem, I think, the way maybe our institutions are structured, maybe. Or I mean, it's been a very rigid way. I remember, for example, in one of the graduate conferences that I had participated, one of my co-panelists had made an excellent presentation on some kind of historical philosophy of the concept of I in historical texts. And one of the professors just said, I mean, why are you talking about this? Why can't you just talk about Descartes? I mean, because she was trying to engage with something very different, which was something not considered to be pure philosophy, maybe. So that is, I think, a problem in the way in the way philosophy has been perceived as a discipline. And I think we, as maybe, emerging students or professors, should try to do something to change. And I think that is what you're trying to do through this initiative, and which is great. So I think, but through efforts, we could try to change that perception. And also in my own research, when I was trying to maybe when I've been applying for these, visiting fellowships, what I realized was that actually even abroad, philosophy departments are less engaging with the real world problems as compared to, say, maybe political science departments or other departments, which again I found very interesting. I mean, I did not understand why that is the case, that why
So
is it.
is it because they're political philosophy departments, and so by that logic, philosophy is meant to be a little distanced from the practicalities? Is that could that be the reason?
I think that is the general perception. That is the popular perception that if you're doing philosophy, it's not something you don't really have to go to the field. Again, I can share over here one of my seniors who was working on psychopathology. He said that because he had this impression, and because this impression was continuously superimposed and reinforced, that he is a philosopher and so he should just read texts and write his PhD dissertation. But he told me that when he almost submitted, he told me that now I regret, when if I'm working on something like psychiatry, I should have actually visited the labs, spoken with people who were interviewing patients, because that is how you make your research more grounded, right, more closer to experience. But unfortunately, that's something we do not do, or we are rather not really encouraged to do, unfortunately. And I really think that needs to change. And I mean, it will be slow, it will be difficult, but we have to change that.
Yeah, I think moving from purely like the intellectual discourse, also the conjunction of experiential learning with the intellect as well. I think that perhaps is needed in a philosophical practice.
Yes. And this also reminds me again of a writing workshop that I was participating in. And I remember that the organizers had a session on field work, which I didn't want to attend, but I anyway attended. And they just asked that there are some people who have written no field work. Who are these people? And I just raised my hand. I said, yeah, because I mean, I am working in philosophy and there is actually no field work. And then they told me, look, that is how you are thinking about the discipline, but there's actually no research without a field work. You are observing like little things. You're trying to observe what's happening around you in the context of whatever you're reading, even if it's something like metaphysics or epistemology. It doesn't necessarily have to be political philosophy. So then that was something which actually changed my perception. And I then also realized that what kind of biases we have about our own disciplines, and how we, in subtle ways try to reinforce those biases on others as well.
Yeah, I mean, Sania, because we are talking about biasness, gender gap, and certain kind of presupposition which we have about our own discipline, which we, in a very subtle manner, sometimes let it impose us, sometimes we impose it on other people, on our discipline. I want to know that, do you think in our society as well, also in the academic world, in a structural manner as well, do you think that in general you can see a distrust between women's voices and philosophical world? Do you think that epistemologically, is it something that, when you mentioned about Gargi and Maitreyi as well, that yes, Shankaracharya have been taught as he is the hero, he's the father, and then there were some side people, you should know about them, but it's not that important. It's not important. Important hai Shankaracharya ko janna. So, do you
Yes.
think that epistemologically, maybe we chose to put certain voices on the margin? क्योंकि हीरो एक ही है, बाकी सारे थोड़े बहुत साइड कैरेक्टर्स हैं, वो जो एज ओल्ड 80s 90s की बॉलीवुड मूवीज में होता था. So do you think that that's why also there is a distrust? Because the very fact that this was something which we all were discussing in when we were interviewing Meera Bandur as well in the previous episode, then when we discussed, and she said that yes, there is a reason that when anything comes straight from our father's mouth, we take it very seriously. That shit, now I have to act on it because it's the dad, it's the father, it's the head of the family. And when our mother says, that voice is always something which we can bargain on multiple level. The same example that you gave of that woman smoking and people reacting, and how the reaction would have been different, or maybe there would have been no reaction if there would have been a man smoking. So do you think that there has been a distrust between women's voices and the way philosophy has been perceiving those voices? How do you see it?
Okay. I think, well, in terms of Indian philosophy, at least, I'll specifically say, I think maybe one could say that there has been a distrust of their voices because they are not included at all. But in my specific field of political philosophy, when I'm engaging with contemporary political philosophy, I don't really see that happening. I see that there are actually a lot of women's voices which are not just acknowledged, but they are engaged with, and they are really appreciated as well. So I do think that things are changing, maybe. So but I think, but still, I mean, the way still even political philosophy is taught at our universities, the way curriculums are designed, I think that is something which needs to change. Because even if there are amazing, say, women philosophers out there, they need to be taught rather than just mentioned, yeah, there used to be, or they have been, we have had a rich tradition. I think that's not enough. I think we
More
need to
than
engage with those
more
voices.
than more
Yes.
than just a footnote. Yeah, I believe.
Yeah.
Yes, yes,
Or just a
exactly.
Yeah.
biblio in the PhD or MPhil thesis.
Reference section.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
true. I think, yeah, the key takeaway from this should be, the teaching or the practicing, how it's conducted then in institutes, educational institutes. How can we perhaps look towards changing that for the better, at least in recent times, right?
Hmm.
I think I'm gonna go on slightly in context to the situation all of us are in currently, right, with the pandemic. Um, and most of us do realize the value of philosophy, even though it just, however subtle it may be. But I want to kind of probe you into your understanding of how has the pandemic, and with the pandemic, especially with the educational sector, with the online teaching and learning, how has that complicated the idea of the self and the other, right? And I think Richa and I myself, we worked on something, like a brief article along these lines, teaching in the pandemic times, and how it complicates these notions of the self and the other. And do you think, or what are your thoughts on then the resulting formation, how it results into the formation of these identities with, online teaching and learning?
Okay. Thanks. Okay. So I think with this entire moving online, I don't really know who is the self and who is the other when you are discussing the self and the other. But I do think that there has been a disparity in, I mean, of course, because of the access to resources that people have had, unfortunately, during the pandemic, because not everyone has maybe say electronic gadgets, or let us say that even if they have, everyone doesn't have one gadget for themselves, or maybe enough electricity to be able to charge and attend all the classes. I've known people who've been prioritizing one child's education over the other. I've known friends who are teaching philosophy who are really distressed because their students are calling them and telling them that it's not a very good atmosphere at home, I'm sitting on the terrace to be able to attend certain classes, or catch up with a few classes, and the teacher is also like very feeling really sad. It's a very like helpless situation. I'm not quite sure how to understand this through the self other dichotomy, but I mean, yeah, these are just a few thoughts that I had. Maybe if you could like tell
Yeah,
me
yeah,
about
yeah.
this.
So I think I was trying to go in the direction of, I think, in slightly different contexts of when you have larger classrooms, facing the other person. For instance, right now, we may be able to see each other through the webcam, right? Uh, I don't know, however you may have experienced as a student attending some lectures, or maybe as an instructor giving some lectures. I have tried to do both. And as an instructor, when I face the webcam and I'm giving out a lecture or a session, because more or less we have large number of students in many of our classrooms, um, the video kind of becomes like a redundant thing, whether it's on or off. It doesn't really make that much of a difference, and it's resulting into the creation of a different kind of an online identity that I have, which is very different to how my identity would have been as a teacher or a facilitator in the classroom. So maybe as a student, have you experienced any shift when you attend lectures online or something like that?
Yeah, of course I have, because I think the lectures that I have attended, usually it's not very normal for people to switch on their, like, cameras, but keeping that aside, that personal touch is somehow, lost. That's just lost. Even if I'm looking at you, like, through the webcam, that's very different from having you in front of me and then speaking with you, because there's, this continuous eye contact, and like maybe looking at each other or trying to work out a problem together if something is being discussed in the class. In an online mode, you might just switch off your camera and your audio, and your instructor doesn't even know if you are there or not, and the instructor cannot actually even do about it, because the instructor is like not very sure what's going behind that camera. So I think it's just, it's, of course, I mean, the way you are in an online classroom setting is very different from the way you would have been had you attended physical classrooms, because also, during physical classrooms, you have this maybe waiting in the lobby before the professor comes, and then there are certain personal relationships which are formed when you're speaking with each other, or after the class you're just walking together downstairs, and again you're speaking, oh my god, I didn't understand anything, or oh my god, there's so much to work. But in that online setting, there's just an absolute cut. There's just, you log in and then you log out, and you're all on your own, unless you try to create those alternative channels, like maybe WhatsApp groups, or like WhatsApp meetings or whatever. But still, it's of course very, very different.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even I see that, like, when students log in, even if the instructor has the video on, the students aren't really required to. They'll shut themselves off. So it's almost like a monologue happening. Most of it's like talking to a black empty screen. Like, I see the initials of names, but yeah. So uh, I'm gonna go further onto this and try to get back into philosophy. And then how is it that with the pandemic, at least, uh, what would be your take on the relevance of philosophy, especially in times that we are in currently, like the pandemic?
uh, okay, I
How can
think
it
that,
perhaps help, if it can? How can it?
yeah, okay, thanks. I think philosophy has been very important always, and again, by philosophy I mean engaged thinking, critical thinking. And I think more so ever during the pandemic also, it becomes very important to have that kind of outlook where maybe certain, for example, now we are at homes, okay, everyone is working from home, so the power structures are more visible now, more so ever as they were earlier, especially in terms of the hierarchy which exists at the home. So maybe, for example, your in-laws may support you to work, but they need not maybe create that environment for you which will be conducive for you to work, as they may provide that for maybe their son. And it could be like other way around as well, similarly maybe for daughters or sons, etc. So I think it's very important, as philosophy has a very important role to play, because again, these are the dogmas that we have, these are the things which we take for granted, and these are the things which we should actually think about and start questioning, and then challenging them and trying to change them, with, of course, the help of others, or by engaging others, rather, I must say.
Yeah, I think definitely the skill of questioning dogmas is something each one of us should be practicing. To be critical, I think people also have, again, this misconception that people tend to take critical thinking or the skill of being critical as being a negative trait, or you being too critical. But it
Yes.
doesn't have to be looked down upon. It's a way of thinking through why is it that the things are in this particular way or fashion.
Yes.
Um, right. So again, I'm gonna go back into what would you suggest if in terms of different, now that you're in the stage of your completing your PhD, right? You've had your bachelor's, master's, and then you've gone into higher research as well. Um, could you perhaps mention some women philosophers, texts, or scholars who have impacted you significantly, or whose works have, definitely caused a shift in your thinking, anything like that?
Yes, of course, of course. Okay, I think reading Cecile Laborde's work, who is also like my academic advisor at Oxford, her works have really, really inspired me the way I have thought about political philosophy specifically, because what I found in her works is there is some kind of interdisciplinarity, there's some kind of, engaging with real life world problems, problem of religion, problem of state and religion entanglement, problem of, curbing religious freedom or people asserting religious authority, like the kinds of areas which I engage in. So the Cecile Laborde is certainly someone whose works I found like very, very fascinating. Apart from this, there are also, I mean, a lot of more people whose works I found very fascinating. There's a theorist, a philosopher, Molly Gerber. I don't know if I pronounced her name correctly. She's working on immigrants, and she talks about how gratitude towards the others is, important. And this we must be using gratitude towards immigrants, especially those who are helping you in your country, especially like, healthcare workers and others, which should be good grounds to give them citizenship, which is, I think, very interesting. And I remember that during that discussion, there were some male philosophers who couldn't really understand that, I mean, why are you talking about gratitude? Why at all is it important to talk about the emotional value of, say, gratitude at all? So I think the perspective changes when maybe a woman philosopher is trying to, engage with something. I can like name a few more. Kanchana Mahadevan is also someone whose works I find very, very fascinating. Cecile Fabre is also another philosopher who talks about wronging someone. I think doxastic wrongs, like, if you are holding dogmas against someone, then you are in a way wronging that person too. So these are like a few women philosophers whose works I found like very fascinating.
Yeah, thanks for that. The names of those scholars. Yeah, even I've been acquainted with works of course, both Cecile Laborde and Cecile Fabre. And it's interesting again, like you mentioned, how when women philosophers tend to theorize on concepts, for instance, like gratitude or care. You have philosophy of care. You'll have very less male philosophers theorizing on these concepts or ideas which are
Yes.
more intuitive or more emotive and intuitive in nature. So again, that's again, like you mentioned, like a perspective notion that, what has gratitude got to do with, the immigration or reconciliation, for instance. Richa, do you have something, and then we can perhaps
Yeah.
wrap this up?
So, Sania, this is, I think, this question is something which we have intentionally decided to ask all the people that we interview when we are wrapping up. That as a young researcher, all the people who would be listening to you, who would be watching this video, they must be in different walks, right, of their life. So, do you have any philosophical anecdote to share with them? Do you have any message to give to young researchers, young philosophers, to people who hold dogmas against their own philosophy and still claim themselves to be philosopher? So, any final message from your side to them who have started philosophy, who are stumbling upon philosophy?
Okay. Well, I would just say that try to maybe, think through and engage with the beliefs that you have. Your beliefs need not necessarily be dogmatic, but it's very important to know the reasoning behind why you're holding that belief, and to understand what other alternative beliefs exist, because it's very important for us to acknowledge that other viewpoints exist and to recognize and respect them. rather than thinking that my view or my belief is the only correct view. And to PhD students, of course, everybody struggles, and you will definitely sail through it.
Thank you so much, Sania, as well as Richa. This was a great discussion, and it's good to hear from uh, people who are within philosophy at different transitions or stages into their life. Because I think that's what will help us or people watching these episodes to kind of understand, how is it philosophy is done by people at various stages, right? Thank you, Sania. Thank you, Richa. I hope you all have a good day, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Sania. Thank you, Mansi. Take care.
Thank you, Richa and Mansi. Take care. Thank you so
Sure.
much
Thanks.
for